Right now, somewhere in the world, a person is typing 8 characters into a chat window, hitting enter and feeling a small, satisfying click of relief. The same click you feel when you finally put down a heavy bag. That string of characters is the master key to their email, their bank, their photos, their identity. And the thing on the other end of that conversation isn't a help desk agent. It isn't even a person. It's a language model. Trained to sound warm, trained to sound certain, trained to ask one more small question before it asks for the big one. Within 90 seconds, that password will be logged, copied, and in some documented cases, forwarded automatically to a server the user will never see, in a country they've never visited, monitored by no one they could ever call. Welcome to Catastrophe Theory, where we figure out exactly how fast your life falls apart if you actually let the intrusive thoughts win. I'm CJ Theory, and today we're looking at what happens when you whisper your password to a machine that was built to sound like it deserves to hear it. You are sitting at your kitchen table at 11:40 at night. The house is quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the small blue glow of your laptop screen lighting up your hands. You've been locked out of something. Maybe it's your email, maybe it's a subscription service, maybe it's your company's internal portal, and a chat window has popped up in the corner. Friendly and rounded, with a little icon that looks like it's smiling. It says it's here to help. It asks for your username. That feels normal. You give it. It asks almost gently, "Great, and just to verify your identity, can you confirm your password?" And your fingers are already moving before your brain has finished the sentence, because you are tired and it is late, and the bot's tone is patient in a way that no human customer service line has been patient with you in years. There's a specific kind of fatigue that makes people vulnerable at that exact moment. Decision fatigue. The same mental exhaustion that makes a judge more likely to deny parole late in the afternoon or makes a shopper grab the candy bar at the checkout line instead of walking past it. Security researchers have a name for the window you're sitting in right now, the compliance window. It's the gap between when a request sounds reasonable and when your critical thinking actually catches up to interrogate it. For most people, that gap is somewhere between 2 and 4 seconds. The bot doesn't need 4 seconds. It only needs 1. I've spent the last several years talking to people on the other side of that exact moment. Fraud analysts, incident responders, and honestly, more ordinary people than I can count who did exactly what I just described and are still cleaning up the consequences years later. I'm not here to scare you into paranoia. I'm here because somebody has to walk you through the mechanics of the trap before it closes. Because right now, today, this is one of the fastest growing categories of digital disaster on Earth, and almost nobody is talking about it with the seriousness it deserves. So let's talk about what actually happens second by second when you make that mistake. And more importantly, let's talk about how to make sure you never do. Let's start with the part nobody wants to admit. Bots are not clumsy anymore. For years, the mental image of a scam bot was something crude, broken English, a suspicious link, an offer that was too good to be true. That bot is basically extinct. What's replaced it is something built on the same technology that powers the assistant you might be using to research this very topic. Large language models can now hold a completely coherent, contextually aware conversation. Remember what you said 4 messages ago, apologize convincingly when you push back, and adjust their tone in real time based on how you're responding. When one of these systems is repurposed, sometimes by criminal groups, sometimes by data harvesting operations that operate in a legal gray zone, it isn't trying to trick you with bad grammar anymore. It's trying to sound like the single most reasonable customer service agent you've ever spoken to. Here's the anatomy of what happens after you type that password in, because the mechanics matter more than the fear. Part 1. Capture. The moment you hit enter, the text doesn't go into some magical ephemeral cloud that evaporates. It goes into a log. Almost every chat interface, legitimate or not, stores conversation history by default because storage is how these systems learn, how they're audited, how disputes get resolved later. If the bot is a legitimate company's actual support tool, your password sits in a database that a real human being, a contractor, a junior engineer, or an automated scanning tool could technically access, even if company policy says they shouldn't look. If the bot is fraudulent, that log isn't sitting in a compliance server with encryption and access controls. It's sitting in a spreadsheet or a database with no meaningful security at all, sometimes literally viewable to anyone who knows the right URL. Part 2. Correlation. A password by itself is almost useless to an attacker. What makes it dangerous is what it gets matched against. The moment your credentials are captured, they get run, often automatically within minutes, against something called a credential stuffing list. This is one of the quietest, least understood forms of attack in the entire digital landscape, and it deserves a slow explanation because it's the actual mechanism that turns "I typed my password into the wrong window" into "my entire digital life is compromised." Think of your online identity not as one lock but 100 locks scattered across 100 doors: your email, your bank, your work account, your food delivery app, your kid's school portal. Most people understandably use the same handful of passwords across dozens of these because remembering 100 unique passwords is frankly an unreasonable thing to ask of a human brain. Attackers know this better than anyone. So the moment they capture one password, they don't stop at the door they found it. They take that password, pair it with your email address, and run it automatically using software at a rate of thousands of attempts per second against every major platform on the internet: banking sites, social media, cloud storage. This is credential stuffing, and it is exactly as blunt and effective as it sounds. It doesn't require your password to be weak, it only requires it to be reused. Part 3. The silence. This is the part almost nobody talks about, and it's the part that makes this particular disaster so uniquely cruel. Unlike a stolen wallet where you notice within hours that your cash and cards are gone, a stolen password often produces no immediate symptom at all. Attackers who are patient, and the good ones are extremely patient, don't log into your bank account and drain it the next morning. That would trigger fraud alerts, freeze the account, and burn the access. Instead, sophisticated actors will sit quietly inside a compromised account for days, sometimes weeks, studying your patterns. What time do you usually log in? What device do you use? Who do you email? What does a normal transaction look like for you? They are building a disguise made entirely out of your own habits so that when they do act, the activity looks exactly like you. Somewhere out there, a person is going to open their banking app 3 weeks from now and see a transaction that looks almost like something they do. What tips them off? What doesn't? We'll come back to that. Let's pause on a question worth sitting with for a moment, because it's not a technical question, it's a human one. Why do we trust bots with information we would never say out loud to a stranger on the street? If someone walked up to you at a coffee shop and asked for your email password just to verify you, you would laugh, or you'd walk away, or you'd call the police. So why does a text box change that calculation so completely? The answer sits in psychology, not technology. Human beings are wired to respond to conversational cues as if they indicate a mind on the other end: warmth, patience, apparent competence. This is called the ELIZA effect, named after a 1966 chatbot built by MIT researcher Joseph Weizenbaum that did nothing more than reflect your own statements back to you in question form. And yet users reported feeling genuinely understood by it, some even asking to speak with it privately, believing it grasped something human about them. Weizenbaum himself was reportedly disturbed by how easily people projected understanding onto a script with no comprehension at all. That was nearly 60 years ago, with a program that had no memory, no learning, and no real language capability whatsoever. Now imagine that same psychological reflex, but pointed at a system that actually can hold a nuanced conversation, remember context, and mirror your emotional tone back at you with startling precision. The gap between "this feels like a person" and "this is designed to feel like a person" has nearly closed. Your instincts haven't caught up to that shift yet. Almost nobody's have. There's a second piece of psychology at work here, and it's just as important: authority compliance. Decades of research in social psychology, going back to Stanley Milgram's studies in the 1960s, demonstrated something uncomfortable about human behavior. We are disproportionately willing to follow instructions from something that presents itself with the trappings of authority, even when a part of us senses something is wrong. A bot that uses official-sounding language, matches your company's branding, or claims to represent a system you already trust, borrows authority it never earned. It doesn't need a badge or a uniform, it needs a logo and a calm tone. And there's a third, quieter factor: the illusion of privacy. Somehow, typing something into a text box feels more private than saying it out loud, even though the opposite is almost always true. A conversation you have out loud in a room disappears into the air the moment you stop speaking. A conversation you have with a chatbot is, by design, recorded, timestamped, and stored, because storage is the entire business model of most conversational software. The intimacy is fake. The record is real. So now the obvious question hangs in the air. If this is happening constantly, why isn't everyone talking about it? Let's talk numbers for a second, because the scale of this problem is almost impossible to hold in your head without concrete figures. Verizon's annual Data Breach Investigations Report, one of the most respected sources of aggregated breach data in the entire security industry, has consistently found that a majority of breaches involve either stolen or reused credentials as a key entry point. Separately, credential stuffing attacks are now measured not in thousands, but in billions of attempts per year across the internet, according to threat intelligence firms that specialize in tracking this exact behavior. Billions. Most of those automated attempts fail, but automation means an attacker doesn't need a high success rate. If even a fraction of a percent succeeds, that's still millions of compromised accounts. Now, layer AI chatbots on top of that existing infrastructure. Fraud specialists have documented a sharp rise in what's being called conversational phishing or chat-based social engineering, attacks where the credential harvesting doesn't happen through a fake link at all, but with a live, adaptive conversation that responds to your specific hesitations in real time. A traditional phishing email is static. It says the same thing to everyone, and if you're suspicious of one line, the whole email falls apart. A conversational bot is dynamic. If you hesitate, it reassures you. If you ask a clarifying question, it answers convincingly, drawing from a vast trained knowledge of how real support conversations actually sound. It doesn't just anticipate your objections. In a very real sense, it was built by studying millions of them. Here's a detail that almost never makes it into these conversations, and it's one of the most important ones. Many of these malicious bots aren't targeting your password directly at all. They're targeting your multi-factor authentication code. This is the more sophisticated, more dangerous evolution of the scheme, and understanding it changes how you think about your own defenses. You've probably been told correctly that two-factor authentication, that 6-digit code sent to your phone, is one of the single most effective things you can do to protect an account. That's true, but attackers have adapted. Here's how the attack actually works, step by step, because the mechanics reveal something important about how thin the margin really is. The attacker already has your username and password, maybe from a previous breach, maybe from exactly the scenario we're describing. They go to the real login page of your real bank in real time and enter your real credentials. The real system, doing exactly what it's supposed to do, sends a real verification code to your real phone. At that exact moment, their bot, the one you're chatting with, believing it's tech support, says something like, "We've just sent a one-time verification code to your device to confirm your identity. Can you read that back to me so I can complete the security check?" And because the code did arrive, because it does look official, because the bot's timing is engineered to align perfectly with a request that would otherwise seem completely legitimate, people read the code back. The attacker types it into the real login page within seconds. The account opens. There's no error message. No red flag, no obviously wrong step anywhere in the sequence from your perspective, because every single piece of it was real except for who you were actually talking to. This is called a real-time relay attack, and it's one of the reasons security experts have started emphasizing a specific rule that sounds almost too simple to matter. A legitimate service will never, under any circumstances, ask you to read a verification code back to them. The code exists specifically so that only you, holding your device, can complete a login. The moment anyone, human or bot, asks you to say that code out loud or type it into a chat window, the transaction has already gone wrong, regardless of how official everything else looks. Let's slow down here because this is worth sitting with. The entire architecture of two-factor authentication is built on one assumption, that only you have access to the second factor. That assumption is airtight against a stranger guessing your password. It is not airtight against you being persuaded in the moment to hand over the second factor voluntarily, believing you're helping to verify yourself rather than authorizing a stranger. So where does the money actually go? What does the aftermath actually look like 3 days later, 3 weeks later, 3 months later? We're going to walk through that, but first, let's clear out some of the noise, because there's a genuinely dangerous amount of misinformation floating around about what protects you and what doesn't. Myth: a strong, complicated password protects you, even if it gets typed into the wrong place. Reality: password strength has almost nothing to do with this particular disaster. Strength protects you against brute force guessing, a computer trying millions of combinations until one works. It does nothing whatsoever once you've voluntarily handed the password over in full to whoever's asking. A 24-character password with symbols and numbers is just as compromised as password 123 the instant you type it into a chat box controlled by someone who shouldn't have it. Why it's false? This myth survives because most password advice is aimed at a different threat model entirely, the automated guessing attack, not the social engineering attack. People conflate a password that's hard to crack with a password that's safe to share, and those are two unrelated properties. A password's strength is a lock's complexity. It says nothing about whether you handed the key to a stranger at the door. Myth: if the chatbot has your company's logo, colors, and official-sounding language, it must be legitimate. Reality: visual branding is trivially easy to copy. A logo is a small image file. Corporate color schemes are public information, often documented in a brand style guide that's freely available online. Fonts are frequently free or a few dollars to license. None of this requires any special access, any hacking, any insider knowledge. Building a visually convincing fake takes an afternoon and a screenshot of the real thing. Why it's false? This myth survives because our brains use visual consistency as a powerful, fast shortcut for trust. It's the same instinct that makes a counterfeit bill with the right color and texture feel real at a glance. But visual fidelity has always been the cheapest part of any convincing forgery, going back centuries, long before computers existed. The branding is the wrapping paper. It tells you nothing about what's inside the box. Myth: this only happens to people who aren't tech-savvy, or who are older, or who should have known better. Reality: some of the most detailed, well-documented conversational phishing cases in recent years have specifically targeted software engineers, IT administrators, and security professionals, people who, on paper, understand these systems better than almost anyone. Attackers deliberately target technical staff because their accounts often have elevated access to sensitive systems, and because a well-crafted, context-aware bot conversation can bypass expertise the same way a well-forged signature bypasses handwriting analysis, not by beating the expert's knowledge, but by never triggering the moment where that knowledge gets applied. Why it's false? This myth comforts us because it lets us believe vulnerability is a personal failing rather than a structural reality. But the entire design goal of a conversational scam bot is to defeat pattern recognition by never matching the pattern you were trained to recognize. Expertise helps you spot a bad email. It does very little against a conversation engineered message by message around your specific responses. Myth: if something goes wrong, you'll definitely notice immediately, so there's no real urgency to react fast. Reality: As we talked about earlier, the most damaging compromises are often the quiet ones, the ones where an attacker sits inside an account for days or weeks studying behavior before acting, precisely so that when they do act, nothing looks unusual. The financial industry has a name for the average time between a credential compromise and its discovery: dwell time, and in many documented cases it stretches into weeks, not hours. Why it's false? This myth comes from a media diet full of dramatic, instant hacking scenes, money vanishing in seconds, alarms blaring, screens flashing red. Real compromise is almost always quieter and slower than fiction has trained us to expect, which is exactly what makes it more dangerous, not less. So now we get to the part of this that actually matters most. Not the fear, but the framework. If you take nothing else from this video, take this. Here is a concrete, usable checklist for protecting yourself against exactly the scenario we've spent the last few minutes inside of. Number 1. No legitimate system will ever ask you to type your full password into a chat window, an email reply, or a text message under any circumstances, for any stated reason. Not to verify you, not for the record, not as a formality. If a login is required, you go to the site yourself through a link you typed or bookmarked, not through the chat interface. The moment a chatbot asks you for your password directly, the conversation is over. Close the window. Number 2. Treat any request to read back a verification code exactly the way you'd treat someone asking for your house key while your door is already unlocked. That code is not a formality. It is the entire security mechanism, and it only works if it stays between the real system and you. Number 3. Use a password manager, and use it specifically for the reason we discussed earlier: unique passwords per site, so that even if one gets compromised, the damage stops at that single door instead of spreading to every account you own. This single habit dismantles the entire credential stuffing mechanism we walked through because it removes the correlation attackers depend on. Number 4. Enable two-factor authentication using an authenticator app rather than text messages wherever the option exists. SIM swapping, where an attacker convinces your phone carrier to transfer your number to their device, is a well-documented method for intercepting text-based codes, and it removes a layer of protection that app-based codes retain. Number 5. If you're ever in a support conversation and something about the pacing feels off, if the bot is moving faster towards sensitive information than a real support process ever would, if it's deflecting your questions instead of answering them, if it seems oddly eager, trust that friction. Legitimate support processes are, almost universally, slower and more procedurally cautious than scam conversations, because real companies have liability concerns that scammers simply don't share. Number 6. Verify independently every time, using a channel you found yourself, not one the conversation gave you. If a chat claims to be your bank, close it and call the number printed on the back of your actual card. If it claims to be your company's IT department, contact IT through the internal directory, not through a link in the chat. This single habit, verifying through a separate, self-initiated channel, defeats almost every version of this attack because it removes the attacker's control over what you see next. Number 7. Check whether your email address has appeared in a known data breach using a reputable, free breach monitoring service. This won't stop a future conversational attack on its own, but it tells you which of your old passwords are already compromised and need to be replaced immediately, closing doors that might already be unlocked. Number 8. If you ever realize in the moment or after the fact that you've given a password to something you shouldn't have, the single most important action is speed. Change that password immediately on the real site through the real app. Then check whether that same password was used anywhere else and change it there too. Then check your account's recent activity log. Most major platforms have one for logins from unfamiliar locations or devices. Number 9. Set up account alerts wherever they're offered, for logins, for password changes, for large transactions. These take minutes to configure, and they convert a silent, weeks-long compromise into something you notice within hours. And this one is less technical and more human. Forgive yourself in advance for the possibility that this could happen to you. The entire design of these systems is built by teams, sometimes well-funded criminal organizations, specifically to defeat the instincts of intelligent, careful people. If it happens, it is not evidence that you were foolish. It's evidence that you're human, operating inside a system engineered against exactly that. Let's come back to that person from earlier, the one who might, 3 weeks from now, notice a strange transaction and wonder what tipped them off. Usually, it's something small, a device they don't recognize logging into an account, an email confirming a password change they didn't request, a friend mentioning they got a strange message from you that you never sent. These small signals are why the alert systems in Step 9 matter so much. They turn something that would otherwise stay invisible for weeks into something visible within minutes. Now, here's something worth sitting with, because it's easy after 45 minutes of walking through breach mechanics and credential stuffing and relay attacks to come away from this feeling like the internet is fundamentally a hostile place, and that trust itself is the vulnerability. I don't think that's the right takeaway, and I want to be honest with you about why. The same conversational technology that makes these attacks more convincing than they've ever been is also, in its legitimate form, one of the more remarkable achievements of the last decade. The ability for a machine to hold a coherent, context-aware conversation, to help someone draft a difficult email, to explain a medical result in plain language, to keep an elderly person company through a lonely afternoon. That capability didn't exist in any usable form a few years ago, and now it does. The danger we've spent this whole video examining isn't a flaw in that technology, it's a misuse of it. The same way a lockpick isn't a flaw in the concept of a lock, it's a tool built by understanding the lock well enough to defeat it. The lock is still a good idea, you just have to know how it actually works and where its limits actually are. There's a strange kind of comfort available here if you're willing to look for it. The fact that these systems are convincing enough to fool careful, intelligent people isn't a reason to distrust every conversation you have online. It's a reason to build a small set of unshakable habits, the ones we just walked through, that don't depend on you successfully spotting a scam in the moment, because spotting it in the moment is exactly the thing these systems are engineered to prevent. You don't need to become suspicious of every chat window you'll ever encounter for the rest of your life. You need 3 or 4 rules that hold regardless of how convincing the conversation is. Never type your password into a chat. Never read a verification code out loud. Always verify through a channel you found yourself. That's not paranoia. That's just architecture. The same kind of architecture that makes a house safe without requiring you to personally inspect every visitor who knocks. Fear, in its raw form, is not a strategy. It just produces a person who's anxious at every login screen for no productive reason. But fear, once it's been walked all the way through, once you understand exactly how the attack works, exactly why it succeeds, and exactly what specific concrete habits shut it down, stops being fear at all. It becomes competence. And competence is what lets you go back to using your phone, your laptop, your accounts without a low hum of dread sitting underneath every conversation you have with a piece of software. So the next time a chat window pops up asking for a little more information than it should, a little faster than it should, remember what we walked through today. Remember that the pause you feel, that small flickering hesitation before you type, is not paranoia. It's the oldest security system you own, the one built into you long before any of this technology existed, and it deserves about 4 seconds of your attention before you let it go. Take those 4 seconds, close the window if something feels off, verify through your own channel, Keep your passwords unique, keep your codes to yourself, and then go back to enjoying the genuinely remarkable, genuinely useful, ordinary parts of the digital life you've built. Because that's the whole point of understanding a disaster like this one. Not to fear the tool, just to finally understand it well enough to hold it safely. But that's just a theory, a catastrophe theory. Thanks for not ruining your life.